This is the welcome. So thank you for coming. This is the startup panel. So our title is Startups 101. The best way to predict the future is to build it. And really what we wanted to talk about here today is the real inside stories of the ups and downs of starting something new. There's a lot of glamorizing, I think, recently about startups, and some of that has maybe changed a bit recently, but really kind of get into some more practical advice on when do you think it's the right time to start something, how you go about doing that, unexpected things that people have learned along the way. I think there's a lot of people talk about failing fast and failure being a good thing. I'd like to think it's actually learning is probably better than failing, and then hopefully succeeding too eventually would be a good thing and not just failing. So we have a panel of different perspectives on this, both from inside existing media companies and starting new ventures and kind of branching out, and all the issues that come with that, like innovating inside an organization, so the entrepreneurial type experience, and also people who have gone off and started their own companies outside existing entities and what that's all like. So we're going to start off with each person telling one story of something that surprised them, that changed what they were working on, that was a key learning point, and we'll kind of talk a little bit amongst ourselves, but we definitely want this to be interactive, and we'll be happy for as many questions that you have and opening this up for lots of discussion. So, the hashtag, yeah, we also are going to have a hashtag for this panel if you'd like to use Startup 101, hashtag Startup 101, and of course hashtag IJF16 too. So if you have any questions, please tweet them at us and we will try to get to them. So without further ado, we'll start from the right with Paul from NewsWhip.
I'm really curious to see if the Startup 101 hashtag gets abused now. I'm afraid of what will appear over our heads. So hey guys, I'm Paul Quigley from NewsWhip. We're a company that monitors social media and media for which stories and events are getting traction. And we kind of signal mainly to newsrooms what stories they might want to pay attention to today from about 60 different languages, excuse me. And I guess, in terms of early struggle or part of our story, there's actually loads of struggles. You pivot multiple times when you get something going. I was told early on in startup land, in my adventures in startup land, that your crisis story, and every story should have a moment of crisis, should only have one crisis. So you have to simplify it. Don't ever tell people about the 15 crises. But the reality is there's a lot of them. And but when you're distilling it down to tell an investor or to talk to a group, you're more cynical and you just make one crisis point in your story and make that it. But the one that really was critical for NewsWhip is early on, our technology monitors which stories are being shared and talked about. And I thought, that's a cool consumer app. That's great. I'm going to give that away for free. Millions of people are going to come running in. It's going to be a huge consumer success. And it just didn't happen that way. We would have pages and pages full of viral news, but the website itself wasn't viral. So, people didn't share it that much. And what I learned then is the people who were using it were journalists, and they wanted to see which stories were the big ones today and make decisions around that. And the really important thing that we did then at the start of NewsWhip is saying, okay, we've got this technology that tracks what's trending, what's cool, rather than give that away for free and try and get into a lot of people's phones and consumer habits. We turned it into a business and we said, let's make this really granular, let's charge a subscription fee, and let's sell this to newsrooms and people who want to know what's trending and going on. And like ever since then, I've always thought startups are best to really focus on one vertical and focus on people who really, really care about what it is that you can do, rather than a lot of people who think something is kind of nice. You're better off finding a small group of people who really, really want it and can get value from what your product is, what your idea is. So that's that wasn't the only crisis, like I said, but that was an early one, and that was an important one that we moved that direction.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very common lesson. I think just to quickly build on that a little bit, yeah, this idea of consumer, like B2C versus B2B, as you would say, like business to business or business to consumer, is a key choice. Focus is super essential, yeah, and building something people truly love passionately, that's the only way you're going to be successful, yeah.
And that they'll actually pay something for.
Right.
If you go back 4 years ago, in internet years, an eternity ago, it was all about users. Like, I've got so many users, and the tide has come out on that, and I think it's much more about, you know, what's your business model, and does it work?
I guess partially because I actually don't work in B2B startups, but I guess we've realized that users don't equal money necessarily. Yeah. People who use stuff for free, they don't necessarily equal money. So I'm Annalisa, I work for Quartz, which is a publication based in New York City. We have several offices around the world. We have one in Delhi, one in London, and then we have a big team, or like a rather big team in Africa and around the US. Quartz is about 3 years old at this point, a little over. I don't know if you're familiar with it. The website is qz.com. It started by a team of people who used to work for the Wall Street Journal, and then sort of broke away and created a digital publication about business, and that now has grown to cover a wide array of other things. Before I joined Quartz, I did not start Quartz, but you're welcome to believe that. Before I joined Quartz, I actually worked on a lot of other startups, so they were all sort of news or journalism startups, but the one that I worked just before was called Narratively. It was long-form journalism, completely opposite from at least what we did at Quartz at the beginning. And before that, I was working for a children's magazine, and before that, I launched a website in India. So I had kind of a sense of, you know, the different stages of startups in many different realities. And for all of them, it was within companies that already existed, so I never had the challenge of raising funds and, you know, dealing with that part of the business. But to what he was saying, and I think I would attest this for all the places that I've worked on, one thing that you learn is that when you start a new company, when you start a new venture, you do it because you're in love with the idea that you had, and you think everybody's going to love it as much as you do. And that is sometimes the case, not always. And I think that realization that it's not necessarily going to start with the millions, but maybe it's going to start with the hundreds of thousands, and the first users, the core users, I think about that all the time. At Quartz, we have our most dedicated readers, perhaps, are the ones who subscribe to our newsletters, and they get the daily brief in the morning. And they're only a small part of the overall readership that we have, but they are the most dedicated, and they are the people that, in one way, we should always think about, whatever we do. And I've seen that literally in every publication that I worked at. The core audience is really the people you should talk to. And then the other thing that they were talking about challenges. I think there's a few, but there's also, I think the reason why there's so much mythology about startups is that there is also a thrill that you don't get in other places, you don't get in bigger places. And I think it's equally heartbreaking, but also very exciting when you see something that you thought was going to be one way become something different or very different or morph into a completely different product altogether. I feel like that sense of really being able to create something that responds to what people want is a struggle, but also is perhaps the best part of this type of work.
Yeah, definitely the roller coaster ride of ups and downs, yeah, no matter where you start. So yeah, I started Hacks Hackers, which is what it says here. I also, before that, started Storify, which many of you have probably used. That's an application to tell stories using social media. But actually, people think, oh, that must have been like this. You had this idea, and you knew what it was going to look like, and you built it, and that all was like a story that, you know, makes a lot of sense and was somehow, you know, a very clear path. But I think with a lot of these things, like everybody's been saying, it's easy. I think actually, yeah, Steve Jobs said this, not to quote it. It's easier to connect the dots looking backwards than looking forwards, right? So actually, I started with a totally different idea of the thing that I wanted to build. I mean, like Paul too, even different at all around Storify was more, I had this idea that I wanted to connect people to stories. So actually, you would know that this story is happening in Perugia, so here are people you know who live in Perugia, and therefore your friends, you might want to ask them in Perugia what's going on with this journalism festival and how is that affecting you, what interesting is happening there. So the idea was to connect people through news stories. And I actually started working on this and started hiring a developer to help me, and I guess what I realized really though is that this problem was pretty difficult to solve. Like, it involved a lot of machine learning and parsing through stories to figure out what they were actually about, and then figuring out how people would be connected to these stories. And I guess I realized in the end that wasn't something that I was the best person for. Like, if I was a PhD in machine learning from, Stanford or MIT or something like that, that would be something for me to solve. But because this seemed like a different problem than something I was suited to, I ended up kind of moving on from that and realizing also that you can't hire people to build things for you. You really do need somebody on your side who cares about the thing that you're working on to be a technical co-founder, which I eventually ended up finding working with my co-founder, who's originally from Belgium, Xavier Daman, and we had worked on different ideas, things that he thought about, things that I thought about, but this idea that became Storify took, to be honest, that was probably 9 months or almost a year from the time I started thinking about different ideas. He was thinking about ideas to come to fruition. So quite a long time, I think, that it takes to figure this stuff out and figure out what you're doing and figure out how to do something that's really authentic to you. I think a lot of things with startups are very personal. Like, it is very much like you're learning about who you are as a person through this, and it can be, sometimes difficult and emotional, and it is very personal. So you do need to find something that for you is something that connects to who you are, that is true to who you are, because you have to be the one living this day after day, especially, as a startup on your own. You have to be so passionate about this idea that you think about it when you wake up, before you go to sleep. It's the thing that consumes you. So it does really need to be something true to you. You can't do things because you think other people might like them. You do need to obviously get an audience, get customers, whatever, but I think it starts with something that's true to you, and that resonates with people when you're able to tell that story and connect what you're working on to who you really are.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. So I'm Juliane Leopold. I was the founding editor for BuzzFeed in Germany. We launched in 2014. And the passion that you spoke about and the belief in the thing that you do, no matter what, and no matter what traditional media or traditional journalists might say about it, is really important, because there will be a lot of backlash. There will be people that tell you that what you do is shitty, and because it's new and because it questions the way things have been done before, and that's frightening for some people. So you have to be really courageous and brave, and you have to build a team that stands by your side no matter what. And that's quite difficult, and it really depends on the market. I think what we found in Germany is that what I found in Germany, it is a very traditional market. There are lots of big players like the public media, which does a great job, but which also makes it more difficult to actually innovate and find that small corner to do something really new. I wanted to share a really interesting insight I had. So I didn't found my own company, but I was the founding editor for an existing company in a new market. And what that meant was that from the outside, and even in our industry, people would say, oh yeah, BuzzFeed, it's great, it's huge, we know it. In Germany, I had to, for instance, I had to find office space for our office. So I went to different landlords, I looked at spaces, and in the end they would ask me where I'm working. I told them BuzzFeed, and they would all look at me like I said in UFO or aliens. They were like, shrug, who's that? And I explained, I said it's a very big startup, it's based in New York, it's very successful, and they were like, how do you make money? So you stand there with a landlord, with some random dude in the middle of Berlin, and have to explain your whole business model just to get an office space. So it's basically an elevator pitch every day. And you have to prepare for that. The guy ended up telling me that he had bad experiences with startup dudes in his space because they grew weed upstairs. So he was very distrustful, and I had to put on my charming smile and it did work in the end, but working for a big startup doesn't mean automatically that you're going to be loved or that people will open your doors. It means a lot of hard work, and if you're up for that, you can have a great time. So that's my biggest win, fail, I don't know, challenge.
So hi, I'm Diogo. I'm from Portugal. I co-founded 2 years ago a new general news website called Observador, like Observer in Portuguese, observador.pt. 2 years ago, the Portuguese market was really sleepy in digital news media terms, so it was fairly easy to have a concept of what we wanted to do. We had lots of time to prepare. We had lots of time to see what was working on the more mature markets. So it was fairly easy to prepare, but we changed our plan lots of times. We had lots of iterations. We had to adapt as we get along before launching. We were fairly lucky because 3 months before our launch, the biggest news journal in Portugal just put up a paywall, so they made our life easier because we don't have paywall, so that was a lot easier. But as soon as we launched, we saw that a lot of our ideas were working great. That was very good, but most of them weren't. And what we had to do was to adapt, and that's what every startup has to do. It has to be prepared to adapt itself, to change. The biggest thing we have to learn is how to adapt and how to change. No, we don't have to learn to do a specific thing a lot of time unless it works. So that's the main takeaway I have right now. So you have to adapt.
Or die.
I was going to say one thing that she said about the elevator, the continuous elevator pitch. I feel like my entire career, the question I've been asked the most is, how do you spell that? Because how do you spell Quartz? How do you spell, and progressively people get to learn what you're doing, but it's a constant kind of explaining. And even if you want to get access as a journalist, even if you want to interview people, there's a lot of just doubt and skepticism because you're not a big industry, a big organization. You're not well known.
Yeah, the number of times I've been on the phone saying it's NewsWhip, not NewsQuip, NewsWhip. It's explaining it again and again. I mean, that's one of the advantages maybe of being from media is you get that there's got to be a story to your company. That, like I said, the users don't all come rushing in because you've built something innovative. There has to be a bigger narrative around it, and I think that's one of the advantages someone coming from this industry has over even a genius engineer who's, one of these Stanford, MIT, machine learning dude. But if he can't tell the story around it, it's very hard to get traction with investors or with the public as well.
And I think it's a very interesting lesson for, especially in the European market where we do, like I said, we have a very strong public broadcasting sector, and it's an attractive place to work also. And then you have big traditional printing houses, and it's a little bit different than the US. Like the news market basically isn't broken. So it makes it attractive for a lot of young people to not necessarily go into a startup because it's if they go to their moms on Sunday, they can say, well, I work for this and this outlet. Like for a traditional media company, it's very attractive. So I think this is something really important to keep in mind if you think about moving into the startup sphere. You will have to build your own reputation. And it means a lot of work, and it's not necessarily always a comfortable situation. There's a saying about leaving your comfort zone, and I'm a little bit tired of that because it's a picture that has been used so much, but there's a very true center to that. You're far from your comfort zone if you start up in a startup. Just because everything is new, the path isn't there, and especially for journalists, we're not technologists. We are people writing down stories, and it can be scary. It can be a scary place, but like I said, it can also be a fun place. But don't expect praise. I mean, that's basically.
And we are not also business managers. That's one of the problems most journalists have, especially in Europe. We don't have the skills to run a business. And that's one of the problems we faced. That's one of the problems many startups face. But I still think we need a lot more startups in Europe, media startups. They are lacking. We need startups that work. We need to show venture capitalists that this is a good market, that it's worth investing, to make it easier for another players to come in and to stimulate competitivity. So that's fundamental, I think.
One thing that I wanted to say, though, it's true that, like, especially like Juliane was saying, if you're a journalist, you don't necessarily have a lot of skills in terms of making business work or technology. But it is part of, I think, working at a startup, the fact that you do learn a little bit of everything. And I think one thing that is fundamental is that you get into the job knowing that everything is always your responsibility. There's no such thing as like, it's not my job to do that. It's always your job to make sure that people get paid. If you hire, if you commission a story to someone, because, there's just too many things going on at once. And, it's your job to negotiate office space, even if you've never done that, and make sure that, the furniture arriving on time. So I feel like that is really kind of perhaps the hard part, but it's because naturally, if you're a journalist, maybe you just want to write and you don't always have the time to do that, but it's something to be really prepared to do.
Yeah, I think, journalists are good at learning things quickly, right? You cover a story and you might have to learn about some science research that you've never heard about before, or, fly to a country that you've never been to and land and figure out what's going on. So I think this skill of being very adaptable is something useful from journalism. Definitely the storytelling aspect of telling the story of what you're working on is very useful, and also listening. I mean, journalists obviously are good at asking questions and probing and listening to people to find out what is the essence of what they're saying, and that is really at the core of a lot of design, user research, improving your product, iterating. So I think kind of thinking about how your skills as a journalist, if that's what we're talking about, people in this room transitioning from journalism to doing more startup things, I think there are a lot of lessons there. But yeah, true, difficult too, that people do not, you're kind of kept insulated from the business side, at least in the past. That's changing.
At the same time, what I found is that you turn into that weird, at least in the eyes of the outside, you turn into that weird lobbyist for startup culture or internet culture. Like, if Facebook screws up, you're the one that answers questions. Like, well, but you work for an internet company, and don't you think it's evil what they do? And you're like, well, it's not even my company. But you're being put, because journalism is shifting in such a tremendous way. As a digital journalist, you're being put, and working for a startup or starting your startup, you're being put into this position of an advocate for change by all means. And it can be really, really tough. At the same time, what I found really interesting, and I would love to hear from you guys, what we found in Germany was that in the beginning we were like the first new form of entertainment journalism, I would say, in Germany in the last couple of years, and people were really craving that and loving it. And what happened was, in the beginning, our industry was really skeptical and looked at us really skeptical and were like treating us like the lobbyists for weird internet dudes anywhere. And then after a year or so, they started basically copying our model and putting up their own copycats of the company. And that was a little bit frustrating, really, because it felt like we had done all of the groundbreaking work, and then the old guys come in and sort of prey on you. And I would just love to hear from you guys if you had like
I had the same experience. Successful projects mostly have that experience, because when things go well, everybody tries to copy it, which is good because you have to innovate again to stay better and stay at the top of your game, which at civils competition is good, but happens a lot. So
Yeah, I mean, I guess the people say if nobody's working on the thing you're working on, why is that? Maybe because there's nothing useful there. So yeah, probably inherently when you start something, it's not a bad thing that you have competitors and people you can point to who are working on similar things. But I think also you can't get too caught up in the competition. There's all these little sayings about startups, like startups die by suicide, not by homicide. So it's mostly internal issues usually, which are probably the main reason why a startup might run out of steam and die, because co-founder issues, not raising money, not figuring out the business model. It's probably not that a competitor is going to kill you. It is very much on you to make this something sustainable, because there's room in the market for more than one company and room for people doing different angles on the same issue.
I was thinking one of the things we haven't touched on is the fact we should disabuse people of how difficult it is to get cash at the start of a media startup. Venture capitalists don't want to write checks for media startups for the most part. The ones that you know about, like the BuzzFeeds and the handful that have got venture backing, are very unusual.
And they themselves had trouble getting money in the first place because, venture capitalists don't want to pay for editors and journalists. It's not a scalable thing.
It's not scalable. They want Instagram, like $1 billion company with 10 employees. They don't want don't have to pay for a newsroom. It's like, journalists are a variable cost, in the business model, and you never end up with this really profitable business. So for the most part, it's very hard to get venture backing. It's also hard to get venture backing if you plan to sell to the news industry, because it's perceived by venture capitalists as an industry without a lot of cash to spend, and where people are very careful, on how they spend. So those are like two tough things, are worth knowing going in if anyone's thinking about doing that.
But I mean, I think, I don't know if the conventional venture capital model makes sense for some startups. I mean, which is also, I think there's a lot of hype around raising money and how much money have you raised and what's your valuation. I mean, this is like, I spend a lot of time and live part of the time in San Francisco, where it's just an echo chamber about this all the time. It's like people have confused success meaning that you raised a lot of money, not that you actually built a real business. So I think people are starting to push back against this and realizing, that there are different ways to do things. I think for media startups, pure media startups, if you can start small and figure out from the start how you can make money, there's no reason why you can't build off of that. There's obviously lots of foundation funding, different other initiatives of people funding new projects. I think you can be creative and find ways to pull something together at the start.
I was going to say, I feel like, generally, I think the world of tech, in terms of investment, has tried recently to invest a lot of money, disrupt journalism. And I think what's been found times and again is that it is really quite an expensive business to run. And you can, as you said, you can't just make billions of dollars on, 4 people being great coders. But I also think that's changing. I also think there's progressively a lot more interest, especially because of the way that social media and society is going anyway, on people being able to tell stories and do it well. And I think I feel there is a little bit of a wave that's changing, and it's really encouraging, and understanding that you can just kind of find a shortcut to it, and you really have to put the money, and perhaps the returns are not as high as they would be with other products, but that doesn't mean there aren't any.
So I wanted to ask actually some of us to talk, and maybe starting back with Paul again, like when did you decide to make the switch? I think it's interesting, we were talking at breakfast, Paul actually worked as a lawyer before doing a startup, so why leave that? When did you know it was time to make a change, and how did you do that? Like, how did that all work?
It's funny, I wanted to study journalism in college. My parents were like, no, go do law.
Smart parents.
So
Smart parents.
I eventually ended up back in the industry. I was a litigator for 5 years. I mean, but making the shift, again, looking at the idealistic and the realistic. Realistic, it helps. If you are someone's going to stop paying you a salary, money's going to stop appearing in your bank account every 2 weeks or a month. You really need to have a cushion there. You need to look after yourself. Make sure that, there's going to be rent there in 6 months, because everything is going to take about 1.5 times longer than you expect. Development, audience growth, I think 1.5 to 2 times is a good kind of startup rule of thumb. So you need to have as much money as you think you need, and then an extra half on top of that. And then on the idealistic side, for me, I had done a bit of savings. I was working my ass off in a big corporate firm in New York. And I was just way more interested in browsing interesting new websites, finding cool stories online, than I was in writing a deposition or a motion to dismiss. So it just, I wanted to turn that into a business. And I'd done some free magazines in college and that kind of thing. And I was just fascinated with how it was all changing, how fast digital and social were changing distribution. I mean, there's still huge opportunities there, I think, for new businesses that aren't having to drag an old business along behind them.
Well, I didn't really leave anything because the first job that I had was at a startup, so that's a little different. But I do know a lot of people who did that. I do know a lot of people who left sort of more established careers or even position in similar organizations to come and do startups. And I think I do think that there is a level of idealism that moves you to do that, and it's that you want to create something that's different. You want to make a dent into something that's bigger than what you would have the opportunity to do at a bigger organization. And I tend to see that it generally it's a trait that people have that sort of goes hand in hand with being successful. I think people that are ready to leave something that's comfortable and well established to start something new and try something new are people who push the boundaries and often are successful. Maybe not in that specific endeavor all the time, but overall, I don't know anyone who's ever regretted trying or ever regretted at least following this month.
Yeah, no, like Paul, yeah, I think I didn't have a salary at all for a year and a half, but while trying to figure this out and launching things, and we put our own money into the company too, just to get an office and computers and things like that. So yeah, you do need to figure out if you're able to do that in your life. This was before I was married and had a small child, so yeah, these things do matter. But also, I think part of the reason I wanted to do this is that I really felt like I had something to prove. Like, I wanted to prove I could do it. You almost need to have this crazy thing in your head that, like, these people think I can't do this, I'm going to prove them all wrong. I think that's, like, maybe a good attitude to have. I don't know, I'd always look for that if I was investing in a founder of a company, I would want to find somebody who has that kind of drive. I mean, speaking in the US, I think a lot of venture capitalists, they like to invest in people who are even from immigrant families, because they're like, okay, you know what it's like to come to a new place and get started. Like, you have something to prove that you can make it here. I think, that kind of drive is pretty important.
That definitely resonates with me. And in German newsrooms, so a little bit about my background, I worked very traditional newsrooms before. I worked for the biggest German weekly before, and for the biggest Swiss, very, very old Swiss newspaper before. And I ended up being, most of the times, the only woman in the room, the only person under 40, and the only person from former GDR. So yay, three minorities in one person. And it definitely puts you in that position where you want to prove that you can be as good as them or even better. And there were like a lot of moments where I thought, well, I feel like all of the energy I'm putting here into proving that I can be just as good, I could put into something definitely more productive in a different environment that is just more open to more diversity per se. So when I joined BuzzFeed, that was the first really big relief to see how many young women worked there and how many young women worked in management. It wasn't like low-scale jobs. It was really, really big and high-scale jobs, and that definitely helped. And but yeah, when you asked me what triggered the switch, it was definitely the I want to prove them wrong mentality, and I wanna do something really cool for myself, I think. Yeah.
It's a lot what Annalisa said. You have to find what's lacking in the market and go and create it. If you find there's something you want to do that does not exist, you go and create it. I first left newsrooms in the year 2000 and went to create a TV production company, a fairly small one that grew a lot. And I'm currently in the process of leaving Observador because it's now settled, it's established, and there are new opportunities in the market. So if you see that you have an opportunity, if you see there are spaces that you can fill and you have an idea and you feel competent enough to do it, you should go and try it. Obviously, you should not be crazy, you should not go without any backing, but if you feel you can do it, just go and try it out. There's not a lot you lose, so you should go and try.
But that's a very entrepreneurial view on it. It's fantastic, but it's so rarely to be found among journalists because that's not how we are trained. We are trained to write down a story, and
that's true.
Maybe it would be interesting to did you learn that mentality, or did you just is it something that you have?
I learned by trying and failing,
Okay.
probably by being a bit crazy, what I was telling you not to be, but I was in year 2000, and that helped a lot because I stayed without salary for nearly a year and a half, and that was hard, and it taught me a lot of things. So I learned by doing it, because we really are not formatted. We haven't learned how to do business, so we need to learn.
But, for spotting those gaps, those opportunities, I think you just got to pay attention to what annoys you right now. Like,
That's interesting,
that's
yeah.
you know, I used to always navigate news websites by the most emailed box or the most shared box, and I was like, why isn't there one of these for the whole internet in one place? And that was kind of because I was having to scroll down the pages everywhere. That's kind of what got the whole thing going. And it's a pretty minor thing. It's me, a lawyer, bored at my desk and wanting, you know, to make it a little bit easier for me to find cool news. And that seems like a really minor thing, but, you know, it ended up being, you know, a solid idea, you know, and we all have those little annoyances, and that's kind of where probably half of good startup ideas come from.
And I think one thing that I noticed, you know, mostly by reading, you know, stories about startups is that I feel like sometimes people have the idea that if they start something, it needs to be enormous, whereas in reality, there's like a lot of, as it says, like a lot of very focused, and actually that probably works better. Small thing that you can work at and you can make better, and you don't need to build, you know, 100 people company. Sometimes it's enough to have a smaller company, and you know that's great. And I feel like one should have a capacity of like thinking really big and being, you know, sort of visionary, but at the same time being very focused and not scared of trying something that's small and very specific.
I see we have one tweet from Letizia. Where are you? Hey, yeah, hi. About not entirely sure about the whole startup concept. We need less disruption and more sustainable innovation in news. I mean, yeah, I agree. I guess that's why I started off this thing saying I think startups are a little overhyped sometimes too. And what is it about this that is, why is that? And I mean, for me, it's not, it doesn't have to be going out and starting something up. That's not what everybody on this panel necessarily has done. I think in some ways it's about this mindset of learning and experimentation and iterating. I think that's something that news companies do need to do, and do it, think more ahead of where things are heading and be ahead of the game. I know, I mean, people talk a lot about, oh yeah, we're using Facebook Instant Articles now, we have a Snapchat channel, whatever. I mean, is that innovation? That's kind of using the innovation of other companies. I think for media to keep surviving, like we need to be a step ahead on that. And it's really hard because journalists and newsrooms are so driven by the daily cycle and chasing the news and chasing, you know, what's happening today, what's going to be on the front page tomorrow, what's going to be on the home page, whatever it is, like kind of taking a longer view and more of a perspective of who is the user of news and what can we build for them that is interesting. I think that's what a lot of the successful technology companies do. So I wonder how we can learn from that too and use those ideas to build more sustainable media enterprises.
I cannot agree more. I really want to like say amen to that. Like thinking about, it's not about praising startups per se, but what I wish for is more startup mentality in newsrooms and in even traditional newsrooms. It's about, I can tell you a little anecdote. So I recently did a consulting job for a media company, and it's not a very traditional media company, but it's been around for quite some time. So I realized that if they have this huge blackboard in the newsroom, but they don't really use it. Like there aren't assignments on it, there aren't traffic numbers on it, like all the things that I might expect when I see a blackboard in the newsroom. So this is a question I have for them, like why don't you write down the assignments for each reporter so you can have a better overview? The answer I get is, in our market, if we do that, we feel like students. We feel like stupid students that have to learn something. We don't look at blackboards. And this didn't come from like a 50 or 60-year-old journalist. This was this young generation, and it wasn't even in an arrogant way. It was just a matter of stating the facts, stating it matter-of-factly. And I just thought, wow, seriously? Like that's, and maybe you understand what I mean. It's if we talk about startup mentality, it means coming down from your high horse of teaching the truth of the world and sitting down, thinking about your users first, and thinking about making an organization work, and not about the credentials you might get for it.
That is really true, because you have to see what we have, and what we have had in the last 10 years is that there is no innovation coming from traditional newsrooms. Now there is some, mostly on bigger titles, but in Europe we see that there is not much of innovation. So smaller startups have it easier to do that innovation, because that's a path forward that helps. But if it was if the innovation was being done inside newsrooms, there would be no room for startups. That would be preferable. I don't know. What I know is that it doesn't exist much.
And I think media innovation it's pretty cheap. Is one of the things that's surprising. Like, I was at a conference with European broadcasters, and talking about Facebook native. How should we be uploading native videos to Facebook? And people say, oh, the cost. Can we? We'd need a lot of teams. But all you need is someone to take your existing stuff, edit it shorter, upload it. It's got to play into a bigger strategy. Do you want people consuming your content there? Do you just want to put teasers up there? But a lot of what we call the innovation, I think, that we're all thinking about and talking about up here, thanks to leveraging digital and leveraging the big social networks, it's not expensive. It just requires kind of buy-in and giving some authority to a lot of the time to younger people who will understand it better.
And I think, I don't know exactly what Letizia, I think was your name, was meaning by disruption or less disruption. But what I'm imagining is that you think, well, someone comes in and say, okay, I'm going to, change this complete. Like, it's been done, it's been tried. But I don't think that's necessarily innovation. I think, especially with, with organizations that grow to be bigger, innovation is thought with a sustainable element. I've never seen anyone just throwing money at something just to experiment. There's always, there's always a lot of thinking into whether something is going to work, and and often it grows by phases, and so you don't necessarily go all out on this one new thing that you've tried and then maybe fail. But there's a lot more attention into just as they say, like, sensing what people want, what people read, where the traffic, like, I'm obviously for digital organizations, where the traffic is going to come from, which means who's going to read your stories, because I feel like traffic is very demonized, but in reality these are people who read your stories and you want them.
So we do have some more questions on Twitter, but I also wanted to start opening it up to questions in the audience. So if anybody
Potete anche
has
parlare in
questions.
italiano se volete, che I can translate for
Yeah.
you guys.
Bene.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if anybody has any questions, like, please raise your hand, and there's a microphone here. Yeah.
Grazie. Ciao. Io volevo chiedervi, prima avete parlato di adattarsi. Io vi volevo chiedere, qual è secondo voi il momento, come si capisce quando è il momento di adattarsi al mercato, ai clienti, ai lettori, e soprattutto fino a dove ci si può spingere nell'adattarsi senza snaturare il proprio prodotto? Credo sia una cosa piuttosto soggettiva, però volevo sapere attraverso le vostre esperienze se avete imparato qualcosa da questo punto di vista. Grazie.
Ci sarà sicuramente qualcuno più bravo di me a tradurre, però so he was asking, because we've talked so much about the need to adapt, he was saying, when do you decide that it's time to sort of pivot and adapt? And how far do you push it without sort of losing who you are, and kind of perhaps changing even your mission? Or
yeah, well, I changed that. We turned into a paid-for service. I think desperation is wonderful. Bottoming out. It's in the first world nowadays it takes a lot to really get to the bottom. To spend all of your savings to when I was about 31 starting into this, was kind of, there was no savings, was nothing. I'd blown the money I'd saved, and it's like, okay, well, let's put up a paywall and see if anyone pays. And that's simplified, but that's more or less how it went. So it's there's that, but then the mission shifts, and then you say, okay, who we're helping is different now. It's not a guy who's lazy at his desk who wants to find trending stories. It's more, let's help journalists do the work that they're good at and less time researching and finding and discovering what's out there by just pushing it to them in an easier way. And it's true, it's a kind of shift in the mission. It's still about making life easier for people, and pretty much any startup's got to do that or you're not going to get very far. You've got to do something useful, and that's always rewarding, even if it isn't the thing that you set out to build in the first place. Like, yeah.
Oh, the question back there.
Hi. I found really interesting that you said that we are journalists and we don't know a lot of things about economic things. I think this is the true.
Business,
yeah, business models and everything. So I would really be interested in how did you do that? So did you pay someone for it? Did you read books? Did you have, this friends from university that studies, something different? So how did you do it, like in the concrete way?
Yeah, well, I could speak about me a little bit, and I think that also segues into something I wanted to ask everybody else about building teams. So yeah, I was fortunate between leaving my job as a foreign correspondent at the AP and doing a startup. I actually did a fellowship for a year at Stanford, the Knight Fellowship, which is open to international applicants too, and it's just kind of an amazing place where you can, this fellowship, you can basically take any class you want to at the university, and you don't have to worry about getting grades, you're not graded, and I did a lot of stuff at the business school there, which is one of the best in the world, learning about some of these things. I think, having opportunities like that to make this switch, those things can help. Otherwise, it's just a lot of learning by doing. I mean, just by figuring it all out. And again, similar to Paul, we also started off thinking it would be a consumer thing and everybody's going to use this and everybody's going to come here to find out what's going on in the world, and had to make that change. And yeah, I think you're kind of forced by your circumstance, being a little bit hungry on the verge of starvation when you're doing a startup, it forces you to make decisions because you have to. And that's kind of why maybe innovation is easier in these smaller organizations that they can move quickly. That's an advantage you have in doing these kind of things, so you should take advantage of that and move quickly. But yeah, I wanted to ask everybody here, I think there's a lot also in the startup mythology about this person, like the Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg, and they built everything and they are the stars and the people on the newspaper, in the stories and on the magazine covers and all that. But actually a lot, obviously, of doing a startup and doing something new is building a team, both inside, existing companies that are starting off in a new country and building a startup. I mean, I think that is something that is not talked about enough. So I wanted to ask also some of the people on the panel, tell us about how you found co-founders or how you built your team and what that was like.
That was actually one of the first things I wrote down on this piece of paper, growth, team growth, because it was such an essential part of what we did, or what I did. I basically followed my gut. So I started to talk to people who I thought would be not only willing, but also reckless enough to join me on that adventure, and who didn't give a damn about what other people said about them for making that switch. And that was really helpful. And I tried to open my mind to people outside of journalism, because I think you don't only need good journalists to make a good journalistic startup happen. You need, of course, technologists. You need people who can, who understand how important visualization is online. All of these things, and I just was really lucky, and I found great people. Now, the growth thing is still tricky, because working in a startup, one of the big things is that if you're not bootstrapping, you have venture capital, you need to monetize really quickly, so you need to grow, you need to scale. And in order to do that, you bring on a lot of people. And bringing on a lot of people sounds fantastic. It's super tricky, because all of your corporate culture, company culture, and the values that you have, and I would advise you to have some, it's really helpful. They tend to get thrown under the bus as the first thing, because it takes time to teach people how to interact with each other in that form of company. And what I found is that every 3 months to hire people, like a bunch of them every 3 months, is the quickest you can actually grow, because these 3 months you need a quarter to get everybody, to onboard everybody, and to teach them those values that you have learned. But do not underestimate the tiring effect that has on everybody, but also the importance of it, of those growth factors.
I also do not believe in the myth of the superhuman entrepreneur that makes everything by himself. That does not exist. You have to have a team. You have to know your skills and go and find the other skills that you don't have on other people and get them on board and try to share the common values that you can build on to do a new project. There was an interesting question on Twitter, how to get students to the startup mentality, which has a lot to do with this. In the university, because they go looking for job training, but startup mentality is also job training. It's just a different kind of job, but it's also job training, and universities should be preparing it for, and they aren't. In Southern Europe, mostly aren't. In Portugal, certainly they aren't, and they should be.
And in terms of not being, the question there about not knowing how to start a business, it's just a series of problems to solve. It's easier probably than your current work. Like I was terrified of incorporating a company, then filing your first tax return. Like these things seem like insurmountable, strange walls. I didn't know, but then it's just a problem. You solve it. There's an MBA available on the blogs. Better probably than an MBA. If you on Quora, on to get Elon Musk's thinking, there's a great essay on Wait But Why, a very good website. Like there's great information out there. You just keep Googling the questions as they arise and keep solving the problems as they arise. There's no secret sauce in business.
And you can always just ask people, really. I mean, that seems so weird because we're journalists, but
yeah,
like
no,
ask
you have the
questions.
greatest resource just out there. I just wanted to say something about how a university could teach. Because I did I studied in Italy. I guess I know that system a lot more than others, but even more than university, I think throughout my career, especially when I was still living in Italy, the one thing that I hear all the time is that you need to find a job, and then once you find, you need to hold for your dear life to it and like never let it go ever, which naturally is true to some extent, but it's also true that you can't. I feel like there is a lot of attention given to, you will find something to do, but there isn't enough on like you will find what you want to do, and I would say maybe that's not the same advice that I would give to someone who has children and a family, but like when you get out of university, you're very young, you can experiment on a lot of things, and just going out and try them, you're not going to lose a year if you try and do your own thing, or like join a startup that maybe doesn't eventually start or go so far. Don't try and look for the safe alternatives immediately, unless they're like incredibly appealing, of course.
There was a question also on Twitter from Giordano Kosu. At what stage of development did you start thinking about marketing and communication about your new baby? I don't know. Yeah.
Stage 1, like it's zero. Yeah, maybe even before you actually get it to life. Communication is everything. I think it touches a little bit of what we said before about being so many roles. You used to be a journalist. You used to just write a story. Now you're everyone. You're your own press person. You're your own marketing officer. You're your own traffic manager. You're everything, and it's tough. It's a lot, but it's a lot of fun too. And you can learn so much. But yeah, communication is the key. If people don't get what you're doing, they won't care about what you're doing. So getting out the word, finding the right story. We talked about storytelling, and it's a buzzword, but it's true, is key to having success with a startup, I think.
But you have to have something to show. When you have something to show, you can start communicating and marketing, because if you don't, people won't understand. That's exactly what you were saying. You have to show them something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
At one stage, because you're creating something.
Yeah.
We hip hop was also one of us.
Okay.
You should. I think
Yeah,
you should be
okay.
blogging or something about it immediately.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, you have to
Because-
be ready to share things that aren't perfect. This is a conflict with journalism. There's a few conflicts with natural impulses of journalists. Like one is you are not the story is what you're writing about, so you have to change that because you are the story, you're telling the story, and you need to tell it in a way where you're actually painting a picture of the future and talking about things that don't exist yet, about that you are going to build this and make it happen, especially when you're talking to investors. And that can be hard because as a journalist, you're constantly telling yourself, well, I can't say that. That's not true. Like, we're not going to be $1 billion or whatever. Like, how are we going to do that? I have no idea. But you do have to change the way you think about things and tell that story and share things that aren't complete and finished. I think also as journalists, you're like, well, I have to make sure my story is perfect because it's going to be on the front page or it's going to be leading the newscast, and we can't make any mistakes because then we'll be sued and all the, all these kind of things. If you make a mistake, yeah, you could be sued or lose your job as a journalist. But with starting new things, I mean, yes, it's not going to be perfect. It will never be perfect, first of all, but it definitely is not perfect when you start off, and you have to get more comfortable with that ambiguity about sharing things before they're ready. Because if you wait too long until it's perfect, then you're never going to go public with it and launch something.
This is actually from, I'm sure you all know, but apparently Facebook, I've never been to their headquarters, but they have a big sign that says done is better than perfect, which I think is the key in startups and in life in general. Just kind of let go of that.
And I think the good thing about having so many hats is that you're so busy that you can't really listen to the peanut gallery, as they call it in the US. Like, there will be always people criticizing, or your industry criticizing you for what you do, and it's very tempting to give into that little voices that say, oh, it's awful, it's terrible, we have never seen like this, something like this before. But when you're really, really busy, the good thing is you don't have time to listen to that. You have, and you have to really prioritize what you're doing, and your priority should always be your readers and your users. And if they criticize you, like if you got the story wrong, that's bad, and you should apologize, and you should, do a better job. But it gets easier to sort through the rumors or through the just sounds around you, because some of it is really not relevant for what you do, and it's okay to not react to that stuff.
More questions from anybody?
On the storytelling bit, sorry, I'll interrupt it,
Go ahead.
and as soon as a hand comes up, I'll stop talking. So journalists are really great at storytellers already. I mean, that's what you've, professionally are really good at. And one funny phenomenon I've seen is journalists, when they start selling something, suddenly writing in terrible marketing speak, because they think that's what you're supposed to do, that you're supposed to use marketing language and sound like all those terrible ads that you hate. And I've seen that happen a lot, but don't forget, you've already got the skills, so just write honestly, directly, just like you would as a journalist, or create content that way, rather than trying to flip into marketing mode, even if you are doing marketing. Journalists are great marketers.
There's a question up
if they stay
here,
true to
yeah.
themselves.
Hi. Hi, I'm Mario, a media startup entrepreneur. It's not a question, rather a comment. Actually, I could talk for half an hour because I'm for 15 years in startups, high tech, etc. I've been a VC, etc., etc. So I got an investor as well. But most of all, there are plenty of things. One thing is how to make money. That's essential. And nearly all the startup founders are lacking that. But I see even more journalists. They are not great in making money. They are great in writing and telling stories. But how to make money? It's not necessarily that it has to be a $1 billion opportunity. Yes, that's true for VCs. But even if they are doing a blog or whatsoever, they should look at how they will survive and make money. That's one thing. Another comment is excellent comment from Juliane, is that building teams, that's really tricky. It's very, very important, essential, how you select your first founding team and pick further people. So it's more important that you choose the people carefully and you sacrifice a bit of time because that is not that important because you will mess it up. So that's very important as well. And what I always tell entrepreneurs is also, if you don't have the knowledge or skills, get it. Be it in the team, be it as advisors or whatsoever, but what I would advise is also that you have a multidisciplinary team, in particular in the media startups. And I see, following the media industry for over 6 years as well, that there are plenty of opportunities for all of you in terms of also building scalable startups. People are not scalable independent of whether they are journalists or not, but we have plenty of opportunities in data journalism, in social media analytics, in many, many, many things. So think of it and get together with others to discuss it. And in terms of reaching out and whatsoever, it's sometimes a bit tricky to go out too early because someone could grab your idea, but get the feedback early on because you should early on identify if it's even worthwhile to do what you're aiming at. That's it. Thanks.
I have a question for the panel. Who's content focused? Who's your favorite startup?
Quartz. Sorry, I really love what you do.
Yeah. It's one of my favorites too. I don't know if it's one, but it's one of my favorites for sure. Yeah.
Content focus.
My favorite startup is Quartz.
My favorite is Scary Mommy.
Scary Mom is good. Actually, Wait But Why is great. Too.
Wait, but
That's fantastic too. I agree.
there's great, like, if you've got a good, there's new verticals emerging, like, you know, science, parenting, things that are really good on social that didn't really work when they were stuck in the back of a newspaper or a magazine, and like, it's hard to imagine Quartz as Quartz could have been a magazine too, right?
I've had yesterday, actually, it was the nicest thing ever. Someone write to me about a story that I wrote and then asked me, where can I buy a copy of this? I really wish you could, but no, it's never going to happen.
So, yeah, speaking of that too, I guess I wanted to ask the panel, and if you have questions, please raise your hand. Where do you think the big opportunities are now, or where do you see media going? What would be a problem you have that you would solve if you were not doing the thing you are doing now?
There are a lot of opportunities, I think. In content terms, you have niche publications that are lacking in the market. I would say, I would talk about financial market applications and news websites, top-end market, obviously, maybe tech also. One of the things I think can work, it would be interesting to explore, is temporary themed news websites, like the Olympics, like offshores, like it's a subject that's working, it's trending right now. You can, if you easy to adapt and you can work fast, you can build a really quick website and deliver on subjects that are trending and drop them a few months later and build a new one. And there are also the trends that you see in society that are not being addressed by the media. I don't know, I look at Europe and I see new political trends forming. You see Syriza in Greece, you see Podemos in Spain, in Portugal have Bloc de Esquerda. Is there a media correspondence for that trend? I doubt there is. So there are things you can innovate, there are places you can innovate. You can search for things that are trending and correspond to them in content terms.
I think what is really interesting is how when I did some consulting for media companies, I realized what we used to call lifestyle journalism or Unterhaltungsjournalismus, entertainment journalism in the last couple of years has changed a lot, and there is so much interest there. There is such a big public interest there, and it's not, I'm not talking about food videos. Food videos are a part of it. It's like a symptom that we see right now, this craze about food videos, but what is behind that is an overwhelmed public that is like fed up with politics because it's over their heads, and there is this battlefield of food and health that they feel they can gain control over and they can have agency on. Like when I worked for an outlet that had a whole week of veganism. Sounds really, really, you know, like a banality. It was the craziest traffic week this publication had ever. And people wouldn't talk about food. They would talk about lifestyle. They would talk about, well, I think you're an unethical person because you eat meat. And so there are all these kinds of crazy conflicts that we have in our Western societies that are, you know, fought out on this battleground. And I think that is fascinating. I would love to dig into that deeper.
I was to answer my own question, I would say, and a thread from what Diogo and Juliane are saying, that this idea to go after niche topics and really build community around it, I think is huge potential. I think we still, even the cool new media startups are still fundamentally broadcast media. They're still putting stories out there and publishing things, but it's almost like printing online. It's not actually starting conversations and thinking about how you build community around these topics. And I know there's quite a few panels at the conference about this, and a lot of people are talking about this. So I think this is a thing that we need to figure out that is still wide open, and we can't, just because people can talk about things on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, I think, you know, that's very broad. If you can really engage a passionate community who cares about something, I think that has huge potential and monetization potential too, if it's a community that might recommend products to each other that you would recommend to each other, that's going to be really engaged. That could be much more valuable from an advertising perspective too, once we start changing the way advertising works to be more about engagement and time spent rather than just drive-by traffic and page view.
One thing that I think I have seen not very much of is innovation. As Diogo was saying, actually coming from the peripheries, so not necessarily replicating some American or, you know, maybe British models into, I'm thinking about Europe especially. We have a lot of, you know, different languages, and I have not seen as much of, you know, kind of native products that then export from, say, Italy to Spain, or like Italy to, you know, cross Europe. And I think there's a lot of potential there. I think people aren't necessarily given the best publications that they deserve, and I think there's a lot of scope for improving that here, especially online.
Yeah, like, you know, buy the domain, $12, you know, WordPress website hosting, $50 a month, you know, Facebook page, Twitter accounts, get them registered. You know, BuzzFeed Food is, you know, what is it, 50 million views a month or something now?
It's the
Anyone could have done that.
biggest growing Facebook entity of all times. It's crazy.
So, like, you know, rapidly edited short videos that I don't even know if anyone follows the recipes. They're just kind of nice to watch.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, Scary Mommy doing that with parenting, IFL Science doing it with science. Like, pick a vertical you're into and, like, go for it, you know. Change the formats. Go play. I think there's some, coming in from the periphery, there's some huge opportunities, because there probably is an area that you know a lot about that you could create a community and a site about.
Okay, so now everybody can go off and start their new venture with some ideas and some inspiration. There you go. So thank you, everybody. Thank you to the panelists. Thanks for coming.
That sounds very easy there.
Now that I know that you guys aren't weird, I definitely want to have dinner with you.
Okay, we need to...